Good morning, everybody. Good morning to people on Zoom. Good to have you here. Becky's not going to be with us today. We were up in Bowie, Maryland yesterday. Becky was throwing a baby shower for our youngest daughter, who's expecting a baby in early April. And I was up there to help set up, and then I had to drive back to come here. So she sends her best note that she is praying fervently that I just don't run this thing into the ground. Okay. Here we go. We're going to do more on Isaiah. Today, never know where I'm pointing this thing, Gerald. Oh, sorry.
Anywhere, just point it anywhere.
Pointing, there we go. Okay, wait, we gotta go back. Okay, I got it now. Okay, so Isaiah, where are we going? Are we there yet? Last week we did an introduction and looked at the background of Isaiah, and we ended reading the passage about his call. Today, we're going to look at that, what we've been calling First Isaiah, chapters 1 through 39. Yes, we're going to cover 39 chapters in the next 40 minutes. Oh my gosh, it's going to be amazing. Next week, we're going to look at second and third Isaiah. The end of the month, we're going to look at messianic themes in Isaiah. And finally, the last class is Isaiah in the New Testament. Today's class, we're going to do a quick review of last week, especially those of you who couldn't have been here. We're going to look at Isaiah's commission. We're going to look at the parable of the vineyard, the oracles against the nations. How fun is that going to be? And the ending of the first part of Isaiah, the last 4 chapters, good King Hezekiah. So, quick review. Remember, the big thing we're talking about 3 Isaiahs. It's one book, 66 chapters, but this was a theory that didn't develop till the 1800s, but it is just kind of an undisputed consensus these days that this book is really 3 different prophets at 3 different times with 3 different foci of messages. There's 1 through 39, which is what we're looking at today. There's 40 to 55, which is really the heart of almost every verse and Messiah, handles Messiah songs that comes from the second part, from Isaiah 40 to 55. Isaiah 56 to 66 is the last one. We have 3 Isaiahs and we have 3 empires, because this is all taking place. Isaiah's message is how to make sense of this world catastrophe that's going on around the people of Israel at this time. The first one is Assyria, and it's the one we're going to look at today. After today, before we open up next week, we have Babylon comes in, and also right at the beginning of next week, we have Persia. So 3 different empires, 3 different Isaiahs, 4 key events. Again, we apologize we couldn't have kept the 3 going, but sometimes you just have to do what's real. In 732 BC, the northern kingdom, which has the name Israel, confusingly, falls to Assyria. And it doesn't falls, it gets destroyed, it's wiped out, it ceases to exist. There is no more Israel after 732 BC. In 701 BC, Jerusalem almost falls to Assyria. And we're going to look at that story at the end of the class today under good King Hezekiah. The other key event is, now we're dropping down 140 years, 120 years later. In 587 BC, the southern kingdom, Judah, falls to the second empire, Babylon, and they're hauled off into exile. And all that happens before the opening of the second Isaiah in chapter 40, because also right before the opening of second Isaiah in 539 BC, Judah exiles return to Jerusalem from Babylon after Persia conquers the Babylonians. So that's the historical grid that all this stuff is happening on. Today we're going to focus on first Isaiah, his preaching to Judah and Israel, which is facing the crisis of these 2 Assyrian threats, the one in 732, which wipes out the north, and the one in 705, which almost wipes out Jerusalem. And Isaiah's message is Israel and Judah have ruined God's vineyard, and punishment is coming. That's kind of a cherry takeaway message. Cross-stitch that on a pillow and put it in your. I do want to know, it's mostly going to be not good news today, and I'm not being fair to the first part of it. Most of the good news of Isaiah is in the second part, 40 to 55 and 56 to 60. But there is good news in the first 39 chapters. But I've kind of grabbed those out, and we're going to look at those in class 4 when we look at messianic themes in Isaiah, because there are some messianic themes in the first part of Isaiah. Most classically, for unto us a child is born, a son is given, and the government will be upon his shoulder, and his name shall be called Wonderful, you know how that goes. Those are in first Isaiah. I'm gonna pull those out and look at those later. So they're there, but we're not gonna do it today. But surprisingly, first Isaiah is mostly judgment. I've been sharing this before class. If you ask me what's my favorite part of the Bible, prophets would not be high up there. I've never really enjoyed the prophets that much. But I thought, but Isaiah, everybody loves Isaiah. Isaiah, you got Messiah, he's quoted everywhere in the New Testament. This was a big learning thing for me. First Isaiah sounds a lot like all those other prophets, which are, judgment is coming, repent. Judgment is coming, repent. And that really is the big overarching theme here. Any questions or comments about that quick review? That was quick. We're moving fast. Got it in gear. Here we go. Isaiah's commissions. Last week we ended by looking at Isaiah's call. I was in the temple, and the Lord's presence filled the temple. There were cherubim and seraphim. Holy, holy, holy. You remember that passage we looked at? Well, that was his call. But then he's given, right at the end of it, he's given his commission. He's called to be a prophet, and then he's told what that role is going to be. As you know, we always call on people to read. Let's not be bashful. Let's determine right now, I'm going to be a reader today. So when I say, would someone read this for me? Ready to go. Who wants to read this for me?
And he said, go and say to this people, keep listening, but do not comprehend. Keep looking, but do not understand.
Keep reading, Ken.
Make the mind of all this people dull, stop their ears, shut their eyes, so that they may not look with their eyes and listen with their ears and comprehend with their mind and turn and be healed. Then I said, how long? And he said, until cities lie waste without inhabitant and houses without people, and the land is utterly desolate.
Finish it up.
Until the Lord sends everyone far away, vast is the emptiness in the midst of the land. Even if a tenth part remain in it, it will be burned again, like a terebinth or an oak whose stump remains standing when it is felled.
By the way, this passage is on the front page of your handout there. So what is his commission? His commission is, God appears to Isaiah in this vision and this call, holy, holy, holy. He touches his unclean lips with coal so that he can be worthy to do this. And okay, here's your job. Go and tell a message, but they're not going to hear what you have to say. They're not going to understand what you say. And we don't want them to understand, because if they understood, they would turn and repent. But we don't want that to happen. We want that we want their minds to be dull. We want their ears stopped, their eyes shut. And we want this until the city lays waste without inhabitant and houses without people, and the land is utterly desolate. This is an exercise in futility that Isaiah is called to do. He's called to preach that judgment is coming, but he's to preach it in a way that people don't get it, that people don't return. It's basically, he's being called as the last in this series of prophets before the destruction of the northern kingdom by Syria. And it's already too late. God's still sending prophets, but God realizes it's already too late. This is not going to be a successful ministry that Isaiah has. Pretty kind of tough job to have. Let me pause before I go into that. Any reactions to this commission that Isaiah did?
Seems a bit inconsistent with what you would think the Lord would want.
Right. You would obviously, God wants them to turn. Obviously, he wants them to come back to him. And we're about to look at a passage where God almost kind of shares his broken heart at the situation. Yeah. Other people are going to say something.
But, if I was given this commission, listen, we're going to do all this stuff and it's not going to work, I'd be like, God, why am I doing that?
Yeah. Why waste my time? Yeah. Why do this? Well, it appears that he's called to be this marker at the end of the time of any hope of any change, and this is it. If nothing else, Isaiah is a witness of Israel and Judah's lostness and inability to get their act together. Okay, flip over your handout because we have this next passage here, parable of the vineyard. Before we get to the parable of the vineyard, and Isaiah in two places, he does it throughout chapters 1 through 39, but there are two real central points where Isaiah kind of lays out God's charge against Judah. One is in the very opening of Isaiah. We're going to come back to this parable of the vineyard in a second. Parable of the vineyard is wonderful because it's told in parable form, but he also does it in more straightforward form. Here's the opening of Isaiah. Hear, O heavens, and listen, O earth, for the Lord has spoken. I reared children, I brought them up, but they rebelled against me. The ox knows its owner, the donkey its master's crib, but Israel doesn't know. My people don't understand. Whoa! Sinful nation, people laden with iniquity, offspring who do evil, children who act corruptly, who have forsaken the Lord, who have despised the Holy One of Israel, who are utterly instructed. That's the opening of Isaiah. And it captures again this message of we are at the last moments before judgment comes. That's kind of straightforward, but here he tells it in this beautiful, famous passage of the parable of the vineyard. Who's in the mood to read? This is a great passage. You'll enjoy reading this. Somebody. Go.
I will sing for my beloved my love song concerning his vineyard. My beloved had a vineyard on a very fertile hill. He dug it and cleared it of stones and planted it with choice vines. He built a watchtower in the midst of it and hewed out a wine vat in it. He expected it to yield grapes, but it yielded rotten grapes. And now, inhabitants of Jerusalem and people of Judah, judge between me and my vineyard. What more was there to do for my vineyard that I have not done in it? When I expected it to yield grapes, why did it yield rotten grapes? And now I will tell you what I will do to my vineyard. I will remove its hedge, and it shall be devoured. I will break down its wall, and it shall be trampled down. I will make it a wasteland. It shall not be pruned or hoed, and it shall be overgrown with briars and thorns. I will command the clouds that they rain no rain upon it. For the vineyard of the Lord of hosts is the house of Israel, and the people of Judah are his cherished garden.
Don't worry about the parentheses. Go.
He expected justice, but saw bloodshed, righteousness, but heard a cry.
Okay, that's it. Okay. So we looked at the opening words from chapter 1. It's a rebellious people, it's a sinful nation, and judgment is coming. Here's the same story told in story form and parable form. I created this beautiful vineyard for my people to live in, and it did not yield good works, good fruit, good results. It yielded bad grapes. I did everything I could to get this vineyard to work, but it has not worked, and therefore I'm going to tear it down. Because, and here's a little play on words, a little literary thing, because I expected justice, which is the word in Hebrew, mishpat, but I saw bloodshed, mispah. You can hear how that kind of alludes to it. I expected righteousness, tzedakah, but I heard a cry, tzedakah. So that's a little clever alliteration that Isaiah used here. He expected justice in society. This is something we do read in Isaiah, that the kings and the wealthy have oppressed the poor and are not looking after the widows and the orphans. And he expected righteousness. He expected his people to follow the law he had gifted them with. But instead, they've gone a different way.
John.
Yes.
So this is meant to explain to the people of Israel why the Assyrians are victorious.
Yes. Absolutely. And we're going to get to this. And this is the thing. This is true for all the prophets. It's also true for the whole book of Kings and Chronicles. In fact, we're so used to this story that sometimes we don't hear it. If we're just a guy or a gal living in Judah or Israel at this time, life is going bad. We've got these big powers around us who are attacking and overpowering and killing and destroying. And the question is, why is God letting this happen? What's going on? Why would this go on and allow it to happen? And the story of Kings, 2 Kings from the get-go, the story of 2 Chronicles from the get-go, the story of the prophets from the get-go, is because you have consistently, repeatedly, over years and years and years and years and years, failed to live up to the covenant. And God has been as patient as he could possibly be with us. He sent his prophets, maybe not Isaiah, who isn't going to convince them, but other prophets don't have that charge. Their charge is to tell people to repent, and they don't. And so how do we explain all this geopolitical disaster? We explain it that this is actually God's punishment. God's not protecting his people, not because God is faithless, because God is faithful to the covenant that the people have been constantly faithful to. I mean, that is the heart of the Old Testament story from after Solomon, all the way down until you get to Ezra and Nehemiah. Okay, excellent. So, God has a specific indictment of Judah. This comes after the parable of the vineyard. That's where we are in here. And let me quickly get to it in my Bible here. And he delivers, after telling the parable of the vineyard, he delivers 7 woes on Judah. You who, he says, you who call evil good and good evil, who put darkness for light and light for darkness. You who drag iniquity along with cords of falsehood, drag sin along as with cartwheels. You who acquilt the guilty for a bribe, who deprive the innocent. You who are heroes in drinking wine and valiant at mixing drink. He goes through. Oops, I skipped it. Sorry. He has a woe on the wealthy. Let me read that one to us. Just what we want here. You who join house to house, who add field to field, till there's room for no one but you. You are left to live alone in the midst of the land. The Lord of hosts has sworn in my hearing, surely many houses shall be desolate, large and beautiful houses without inhabitant. For 10 acres of vineyard shall yield but 1 bath, and a homer of seed shall yield a mere ephah. I always was told that if someone ever asked what's an ephah, just to say 10.5 bushels is a good enough answer. There's a woe on the wealthy who are accumulating land and squeezing out people who can't afford this and are amassing in a greedy way. There's a woe on those who are the eat, drink, and be merry type, just taking life not seriously at all. There are a woe on those who walk in sin. That's a great Hebrewism, to walk in sins, to live this life consistently, going, walk in righteousness, walk in the light, walk in sin. These are phrases we know from the Bible, but it's a great Hebrew parabolic language of describing things. Woe on those who have no moral compass. Woe on those who are proud and self-sufficient. Woe on those who are drunkards. Woe on those who corrupt justice. God has made this vineyard. It's been despoiled. And so now here's his indictment. Other Isaiah indictments, not from the center, but in the other parts of Isaiah, there's indictments for idolatry. This is constant sin. It really is the number one sin of Israel throughout its history, all the way back to the time of the judges, all the way back to the time of the golden calf, is they are unable to let go of these other religions and to worship God exclusively. They worship God, but they also worship these other gods too. And from the beginning, this is the kind of unrootable, outable sin of Israel. John Calvin once said that the human mind is a veritable idol-making factory. And this is the original sin of us, is we constantly want to create our own gods to worship. Another diamond is empty worship, ritual and sacrifice, but without any faith or action behind it. We get this in Isaiah and many of the prophets. I despise your feasts, get away from me with your stinky sacrifices, do justice, those kinds of things. And a failure to protect the oppressed, the orphan, and the widow. The social justice issue is very much in the prophets. I would not say it's the main thing, but it's certainly there as well. So the society is in a bad way, and so therefore, because of all this, because of this vineyard that's gone to waste, because of all these behaviors that are so outside the covenant, therefore, God's judgment is coming upon you because you have rejected God's law. God is angry with his sinful people, and most specifically and relevant from the historical, God's going to use a foreign power to punish his people. Back to Bill's questions, godly people would assume God's going to protect them from foreign powers. But in this case, God's no. And not only am I going to stand aside and let that foreign power do this thing, I'm actually going to use that. I am directing the affairs of that foreign power to be my instrument, bring judgment on the people. When you see Becky next week, you have to say, John had the most clever slide in this thing. I always say that, the clerk's couple, I'm the steak and she's the sizzle, but she's the steak and the sizzle. And I got no sizzle at all. And she keeps, my PowerPoints are just like a digital blackboard. I'm just writing words up. And she's always getting me to do stuff like this. It's way outside my comfort zone. But did any of you see the movie Twins? And the great thing over the rule in a crisis situation. You do not know the first rule in a crisis situation. The rules in the crisis situation. And if you remember, I had to look these up. So she good. They are to if you choose to bluff, you must be prepared to have your bluff called. Always have a plan. And the third rule in a crisis situation is duck. We are in a crisis situation in Israel. Assyria has wiped out the north and it's threatening the south in a major way. And this is the situation of all the prophets, but particularly Isaiah, who's at the end of this time when Assyria is pressing down on the north. And so this is how the prophets react to this. They're facing this geopolitical catastrophe. How do God's people understand this? Well, life is random and bad things happen. No, that's not how the prophets react. The big guys win, the little guys lose. No, that's not what the prophets are. God is an underachiever. No, that's one of my favorite lines from Woody Allen, Love and Death. I don't know if you've watched that movie. It's his takeoff on Russian literature. At the very end, he looks at the camera and goes, in the end, I don't know if I believe that God exists, but if he does, I think he's an underachiever. But no, these are not how the prophets make sense of all this stuff going on. They say two things. He's the creator of the world, the sole creator of the world. He is the Lord, the sole Lord of history. That even in this catastrophic time, God is in control. But he's in control because God is using Assyria to exercise God's judgment on Israel and Judah. And the faithful God is disciplining his unfaithful children. The whole concept of God and punishment, this is hard for us. We know all the bad things that come with this. But, to try to enter into Isaiah's view of this, God's view of this, reflect on being a parent. You've had time with your children where you've had to be harsh with them, and you weren't harsh with them because you were messed up and working out your issues with your parents. You were harsh with them because they needed to be brought back into line because they were messing things up in a major way. Some of you know this a little ways, some of you know this in big ways. And whether you did it perfectly or pretty good or so, the motive for it was, I love this child so much, I just can't stand aside and watch as this child just messes up his life irredeemably. I've got to intervene. And this intervention might be very harsh, and my child might perceive this as very harsh. But it truly is motivated from love. This is the view of the prophets. God is completely in control of this crisis that's going all around. He's the one who's moving the chess pieces on the geopolitical international board, and he's moving them in such a hard way on Israel and Judah because they need to be brought back. And it's gotten to this point where extreme measures are in play.
Next question.
Yes, well, perfect timing. Yes.
When you say that we completely wiped out Israel, where it was?
Right. So
It wasn't exile like later.
So every empire has different conquering strategies. The Assyrian strategy was to, they came in and they burned down cities and killed soldiers and got rid of the king and stuff like that. And now you have this country under control. How do you rule this country? They did, well, a lot of people fled. There were refugees who said, I'm getting out of here. That's the beginning of what you call the dispersion of the Jews around the Mediterranean. But the Assyrians, what they would do is they'd bring in Assyrians to settle in what we used to call Israel and intermingle and intermarry. So in a generation or two or three, there's very little memory of Israel left. So I try to think in modern terms where countries disappear. Do we have countries that disappear anymore? I don't know.
Yeah.
Yes.
But aren't the Samaritans,
Yes.
as descendants of that, within there's still a few 100,000.
Right. So yes, we're talking now 700 years later, 700 years later in the time of Jesus. I mean, they've existed before then, but they pop up again in the time of Jesus as the Samaritans. And the Samaritans are the descendants of the conquered Israelites. And there was a part of that territory where they still worshiped Yahweh and try to follow the Torah and stuff like that. But let me make it clear beyond words. The Jews, and by the way, Jews comes from Judah, right? We're all clear with that. That's why we call them Jews and not Israelites, because Israel disappeared and the Judah continued. That's why we call them Jews. The Jews had no time for them. You can tell me you follow the law. No, you guys are heretics, and it's more intense than the Catholic Protestant thing in Ireland. It's more intense than the what is it, Shia, and what are the two? Sunni and Shia kind of a thing. It was, yeah, you're there, but you don't count at all. Yeah.
And Ryan has just entered in the chat and making sort of that same point that these are the descendants of the same tribes. Now, I mean, the people who are in Israel, anyway, people in that area have been assimilated.
I'm sorry, in modern times, or?
Oh, he's saying, well, I'll let you read what he says.
So because of that intermarriage, these people are ethnic. Right, so what, it is so confusing because the nation that now exists in, oh God, it's all so loaded. I'm going to use the word land of Palestine. Don't read anything into that. I'm just trying to describe a place on the map. The country's name is Israel, but those who follow Yahweh are Jews. They are descendants of Judah and Judites who got spread around the world because they're the ones who stayed after the exile, after the restoration, and Ezra and Nehemiah, who stayed faithful to the covenant, and then they got dispersed by the Romans in 70 AD. And but yes, so Israel is empty of Israelites and it's full of Judites. This is how confusing it all is. And I got to be honest, I'm sure there's a very clear reason why they chose the name Israel for the country as opposed to Judah. I don't know. Modern times, I'm not familiar enough how they came up with that. Okay. Ready to move on? Oh, no, yes.
This might just be a little too abstract, but riffing off of your analogy of like sort of tough love with children. Do the children tend to survive that? So who is the child?
Judah.
And God is, okay, so there's a child in the sense of some collective group of people, however few, that survive this experience and they will be corrected and put on the right path?
Yes, because the entire story of the Old Testament is the story of the two southern tribes' memories of this all. Israel's story is only told through Judah's eyes. The people who saved these documents, reported these documents, kept them in that scripture, these are all the two southern tribes of Judah and Benjamin. And so for them, Israel is a lost cause from the get-go, retrospectively, looking what happens and what like that. So they are the ones that God, we're going to get to that when Babylon appears and sends them off into exile. But yes, Judah is the remnant of the people of Israel. It's the remnant of the children of Abraham, who are the focus of God's preservation through these times. Okay. Whoops. Okay. Well, that hasn't been any fun at all. So let's now go look at a really fun part. Oracles against the nations. Here's a crazy thing. And again, it's one of the reasons why I have trouble. If you've ever done read the Bible in a year kind of a thing, and you get that long section through the prophets, you read a lot of this. You have these chapters that are basically curses on all the nations around them. And it's not just like one chapter. We've got 11 chapters here in Isaiah. It happens in Jeremiah, chapters 46 to 51. It happens in Ezekiel, chapters 25 to 32. Amos, chapters 1 through 2. Obadiah is a one-chapter book, and it's all of a curse on Edom. Nahum is a 3-chapter book, and 2 of them are a curse on Nineveh. Zephaniah. So this is a thing you find over and over again in the prophets, and we have it in Isaiah. it's 11 chapters of 39 chapters of First Isaiah. You just can't tiptoe around it and say, well, we won't look at that. We'll look at the real message of Isaiah. This is part of the real message of Isaiah. And really, of all the prophets of God are to send these curses on Israel's, Judah's enemies. This is the hit list. These are the countries who get it in Babylon. Those of you who are hanging on by fingernails to all this ancient history stuff are probably thinking Babylon. Babylon doesn't even exist during First Isaiah. And you're right. It shows part of the complications of the book of Isaiah, that even though we talk about 1, 2, and 3, as it's been collected and edited, some concerns from the future are brought into the early parts, because Babylon didn't even exist then. Why would First Isaiah be cursing Babylon when Babylon didn't even exist at that point? But there you go. Babylon's in there. Assyria, which is essentially Iraq. Philistia, that's Gaza. Moab is South Jordan. Of course, Israel gets a verse on it. Ethiopia, Egypt, Babylon again. Edom, which is the southern border. Arabia, Sinai. Judah gets a condemnation. Tyre. These are. Let's get a little taste. Let's get a little taste of what's going on here. It's challenging to read these oracles now. When you're doing your year through the Bible and you hit these sections, you just kind of go, "Oh my God, this is so hard. This is so hard." First off, we don't know all that much historical information about these enemies, and we don't know the details of their conflicts with Israel, other than that they are hostile neighbors. And it sounds like the classic, Old Testament angry, punishing God. I had a German. He was German, but he lived in America. Church history professor, and he described an early heresy of the church, a man named Marcion. And he said, Marcion believed that the God of the Old Testament was a bad God. Well, this is what this sounds like here. I mean, God is just letting it fly on all the ends. Wait, whoa. There
you go.
Oh, there we go. But the way to understand the oracles against the nations is bad news for my enemies is good news for me. If God is going to punish this nation that's always attacking us, that's good for me. I'm good with that. And more importantly, God of Israel, this tiny little country in this tiny little, in between all these regional superpowers, the God of Israel, in fact, is the ruler of world history. And these other nations live within God's directing will. With all this political chaos going on, the prophets, the Bible as a whole, believe that this is all under God's control. Okay, so we'll get a little taste of this. This is just the one against Moab. Moab is in the southern part. An oracle concerning Moab. Because Ar is laid waste in a night, Moab is undone. Because Kir is laid waste in a night, Moab is undone. Daughter Dibon has gone up to the high places to weep over Nebo and Medeba, Moab wails. Every head is shaved, every beard is shorn. In the streets they bind on sackcloth. On the housetops, the squares, everyone wails and melts in tears. Heshbon and Elak cry out. Their voices are heard as far as Yahaz. Therefore the loins of Moab quiver. His soul trembles. When loins are quivering, things are going bad. My heart cries out for Moab. His fugitives flee to Zoar. Wow, I have extra prize for whoever can say what that is. For as you ascend to the Lewis, they go up weeping on the road to Horanium. They raise a cry of destruction. The waters of Nimrin are a desolation. Grass is withered, new growth fails, vegetation is no more. Therefore, the abundance they have gained and what they have laid up, they carry away over the wadi of the willows. For a cry has gone around the land of Moab. The wailing reaches to Eglam. The wailing reaches to Beer-elam. For the waters of Dibon are full of blood, yet I will bring upon Dibon even more. A lion for those of Moab who escape, for the remnant of the land. So that gives you kind of a taste of what goes on with these 11 chapters. It's hard stuff. It's brutal stuff. But again, let's do a mind experiment right now. Right now, I'm a Ukrainian living in central Ukraine, and I read there a prophet emerges amongst the Ukrainian church, and he says something like this, except the subject is not Moab, but is Russia. I go, well, that's good news. I'd love to see that prophecy come true. This evil nation invading us, taking over our land, wreaking all this havoc. That's the sense of it. It's tough stuff. It's not turn the other cheek kind of stuff, but that's where it's driving. Well, here's what here's what's amazing. In the midst of these 13 chapters, which is just like I read in Moab, it's just we get this incredible, surprising, stunning thing, which nobody really knows how to make sense of. It's about Egypt. Okay, no, Egypt is the OG bad guy. I mean, there's nobody worse than Egypt. Egypt kept us in slavery for 400 years. Pharaoh, all that kind of stuff. Egypt is the original bad. And so they get a oracle against them, and it predicts that civil war and confusion is going to fill up Egypt. Egypt's going to be ruled over by a foreign king. There's going to be natural destruction. The Nile will dry up. There'll be confusion and impotence among Egypt's ruling class to deal with this crisis. Judah will defeat Egypt. I mean, this is amazing stuff, but it's all typical. But then, say what? We get to the end of this, and this is amazing. This is amazing. After all of this judgment and the Nile drying up and economic meltdown and political meltdown, on that day, there will be an altar to the Lord in the midst of the land of Egypt, and a pillar to the Lord at its border. It will be a sign and a witness to the Lord of hosts in the land of Egypt. When they cry to the Lord because of oppressors, he will send them a savior and will defend and deliver them. But Egypt is the stereotypical oppressor. And that's what Egypt is. But God's gonna wait a second. The Lord will make himself known to the Egyptians, and the Egyptians will know the Lord on that day, and will serve with sacrifice and offerings, and they will make vows to the Lord and perform them. The Lord will strike Egypt, striking but healing, in this kind of disciplining thing. So they will return to the Lord, and he will listen to their supplications, and the Lord will heal them. On that day, there will be a highway from Egypt to Assyria, and the Assyrian will come into Egypt, and the Egyptian into Assyria, and the Egyptians will serve with the Assyrians. Again, I always think the best analogy here is if you think of Israel as Poland and Egypt as Germany and Assyria as Russia. If you know anything about Polish history is constantly being wiped out from the east and by the west as these two regional superpowers, Germany and Russia, are constantly fighting. And to fight each other, they have to go through Poland, and all they do is wreak destruction. This is the story of Israel. It's right between these two big superpowers, Egypt and Assyria, who are always attacking each other. And as they attack each other, they're always wiping and trotting through Egypt. But now God's going to build a highway for these two to interact. And on that day, Israel will be the third party with Egypt and Assyria, a blessing in the midst of the earth, whom the Lord of hosts has blessed, saying, "Blessed be Egypt, my people, and Assyria, the work of my hands, and Israel, my heritage." This is right in the middle. It's chapter 19. Right in the middle is 13 to 23. This oracles against the nation. It follows kind of a standard curse on Egypt. And then it has this amazing vision of not just world peace, but a complete revelation to Egypt and Assyria, reconciliation with Egypt and Assyria, salvation of Egypt and Assyria, joining, one big kumbaya moment with Egypt and Assyria and Israel. The passages that the words that are highlighted in yellow there, my people, the work of my hands, my heritage. Those are phrases that are only ever used in the Old Testament to describe Israel. These are his pet names for Israel. These are the expressions of his intimate love for Israel. Take a moment, take a deep breath, think about your spouse or your children, think about a pet name you have for them. Pet name that you only say to them, no one else knows that name, the little intimate name that you have. When I was up in Maryland this weekend and we had dinner, and there was sweet corn pudding. Now, I'm not saying Becky calls me sweet corn pudding, but you know what I mean. It's one of those words. It's one of those words, and God is saying, Egypt is my sweet corn pudding. Egypt and Assyria are the bad guys. And it doesn't say because Egypt and Assyria, they finally saw the light and they were doing good works and everything. God just calls them and brings them into this whole unprecedented, whole new relationship with himself. This is a radical clarification of God's covenant with Israel, that God's covenant with Israel includes its enemies. By the way, everything I'm saying at this point, this is like a one-off in the Old Testament. No, you don't find this anywhere. And it's interesting, when you read commentaries on this, they don't kind of know where to place this, because this is so out of left field that is just amazing. This is more radical than Jesus. Jesus says, love your enemies, pray for those who persecute you, but that assumes you're still going to have enemies. Let's assume enemies not only are gone, they become your family. This is an amazing thing, that on that day, God's kingdom truly reigns on earth as does in heaven. God's victory will not be retribution against God's enemies, but it'll be an unexpected and a gracious inclusion of God's enemies within the people of God.
But why does this happen?
I don't know. I know, and it struck me. I was doing one of my year through the Bible things, and I was slogging along in the Oracles of Nations, like, yeah, and I hit this thing, and I almost fell out of my chair, like, why have I not heard about this before? But again, I've read. Well, here's Walter Brueggemann. We all know Walter Brueggemann. He's a great Old Testament scholar. He goes, Isaiah 19 culminates in one of the grandest, most daring hopes of the entire Bible. We exist as God's people for the sake of our enemies. Well, that's a great saying, but nobody can talk. There's no place to put this thing. It's so out of the blue. I mean, I guess I'm just really thinking off the top of my head. It's one of those places where it's one of these hints, these prophecies of where God's plan is going ultimately, that we see fulfilled in Jesus Christ. But there's no mention of a Messiah here. This is not sent into that kind of a future. This is a future hope. And we don't see this, lived out in any way in the actual history of the people of the Jews. But
was it intended just to say that it is in control, not just of Israel, but God is in control of, just like you started with
Well, clearly, the prophetic response to the crisis situation is God is in control. This is not chaos happening on the world. God's not been pushed on side. God is directing all this stuff. But except for this passage here, God's directing stuff, it's all kind of judgment and curses and stuff. But this is God's in control to bring this universal reconciliation of an amazing thing. I encourage you, go when you have time this week, read like chapters 18, 19, and 20 in this Oracles to see how this thing just pops out of the blue. And not only pops out of the blue, it kind of shuts down immediately once we get past this. We're on to curses of other countries around us. It's an amazing thing. I guess that's where I would press this. How do I make sense of this? It is one of these kind of irrepressible marks of the real word of God. That even in this just really hard slog of these 11 chapters of curses upon all these enemies of Israel, there's another vision of what it means to live as God's people, what it means to live in and amongst enemies of this world. All right, these are comments. Your mind is blown. I love it. I can see it. Your mind is blown.
Names are really interesting. Why do they have any significance beyond, like, why is Assyria the work of my parents?
Well, no, my point is all through the Old Testament, Israel is called the work of my hands, and Israel is called my people. Israel is called my heritage.
Okay.
These are God's pet names.
Like this,
these are
everybody is sweet corn
pudding, and I'm saying Egypt is sweet corn pudding. What would we say? Russia is sweet corn pudding. China is sweet. We're trying to kind of work out a balance of power with them, and best kind of a thing. But it's mind blowing. It's mind blowing. Okay, I told you there'd be some good stuff in First Isaiah. Okay, here we go. Last bit, we're going to finish this up to the last 4 chapters of the book of Isaiah. I'm sorry, the first Isaiah, 36, 37, 38 through 9, are about the story of King Hezekiah. Let's get the story of King Hezekiah. First, King Hezekiah had a bad father. His father was King Ahaz. And King Ahaz is another, this long line of bad kings of Judah. Anybody in the mood to read?
I'll read.
Thank you.
In the 17th year of Pekah, son of Remaliah, King Ahaz, son of Jotham of Judah, began to reign. Ahaz was 20 years old when he began to reign. He reigned 16 years in Jerusalem. He did not do what was right in the sight of the Lord his God, as his ancestor David had done. But he walked in the way of the kings of Israel. He even made his son pass through fire, according to the abominable practices of the nations whom the Lord had driven out before the people of Israel. He sacrificed and made offerings on the high places, on the hills, and under every green tree.
Okay, so the son thing, he sacrificed his son. He gave his son as a burnt offering, clearly not to the true God, but to these other gods. And he was an idolater. That's what all this stuff was. Okay, so it had as this bad news. But other than the sacrificing a son in a fire, this is all kind of standard stuff. If you read Kings, it's just kind of again and again. You know, when Ahaz dies, the next king comes, and he did not do what was right in the sight of the Lord, and he also worshipped on the high places. It's kind of a repetitive story. So that's his dad. Ahaz was king during the time when Assyria came down and wiped out the northern kingdom. Ahaz was king at that point. Hezekiah succeeds his father as the king of Judah. And here's an interesting thing. These 4 chapters that we're talking about now are almost word for word lifted from 2 Kings 18, which is the story of King Hezekiah in 2 Kings. It's almost like they cut out 2 Kings 18:13 to 20:19 and pasted it in at the end of Isaiah. Interestingly, the same thing happens in Jeremiah. The last chapter of Jeremiah is a cut and paste of 2 Kings 25, which talks about the destruction of Jerusalem by Babylon. So it's telling the story, the history, that there are, Isaiah does have a role in these chapters, and he gives prophecies, but that's also recorded in 2 Kings. So now it's telling the narrative of what's going on. Here's the big thing for first Isaiah. King Hezekiah, for Isaiah, this is what Isaiah believes God is telling him. The king Hezekiah is the one who fulfills the prophecies. The good news we've been suppressing until class 4, the good news in the first part of Isaiah about God's deliverance. For unto us a child is born, a son is given. This is Hezekiah, Isaiah believes. A shoot shall come from the stump of David. This is Hezekiah in Isaiah's prophecy. That Hezekiah is the person that God sends to Judah to protect it and preserve it in this crisis time when Assyria is running amok all over the place. And we'll see how that happens.
So is Hezekiah in the line of David?
Yes, yes. Yeah, all the kings of Judah are in the line of David. Yeah, absolutely. So here's the story of Hezekiah. I'll read this. In the 3rd year of King Hoshea of Israel, again, Kings always goes back and forth. Now we're talking about Israel. Now we're talking about Judah. So we're referencing where Hezekiah fits in the story of Israel. But whatever happens up there, Hezekiah, the son of Ahaz, of Judah, began to reign. He was 25 years old when he began to reign. He reigned 29 years in Jerusalem. He did what was right in the sight of the Lord. Again, if you read the book of Kings and you're through the Bible thing, you're going along and go, whoa, somebody did something right. Whoa, this is new. This is something different. He's the first king after Solomon. He's the first king after the split of the kingdoms, who in both the north and the south, who does what is right. Just as his ancestor David, he removed the high places, idolatry, broke down the pillars, idolatry, cut down the sacred pole, idolatry, broke in pieces the bronze serpent that Moses had made, for until those days the people of Israel had made offerings to it. Remember the bronze serpent? Do you know that story? We're in the wilderness, we're wandering from Egypt towards the promised land. A lot of things happen. At one point, they get attacked by poisonous snakes who bite people, and people are starting to die. And God tells Moses to make a pole with a bronze snake on it. And if people look at the bronze snake and believe, they'll be healed of their poisonous bites. Interestingly, in the Gospel of John, John takes that as a little parable of Jesus was raised on a pole. He looks like a human, he looks like a snake, he looks like a snake, but there's no poison in him. And if you look at that, you will be saved. Interesting. But that's the thing. But they kept this thing, and now they're worshiping this bronze snake, even though it was a classic thing. Classic problem that we all struggle with is that God gives us these gifts, and we misuse them. This was a gift of salvation that He gave to them in the wilderness. Here's this bronze serpent. Look at it, believe you'll be healed of your poison, your venom bites. But they held on to it, and now they're making offerings to this bronze pole. Very crazy. So Hezekiah did that. He did some more stuff. Who wants to read this one?
He relied on the Lord, the God of Israel, so that there was no one like him among all the kings of Judah after him, or among those who were before him. For he held fast to the Lord, he did not depart from following him, but kept the commandments that the Lord had commanded Moses. The Lord was with him wherever he went, prospered, and rebelled against the king of Assyria, would not serve him.
You know, it's interesting. When you read Kings, it's not until you hit a verse like this that you realize, I haven't heard any references to the law in a long time. Things have gotten so bad, people forgot about it. The next good king that comes a good ways after Hezekiah is Josiah. And he's a good king because one day they're doing some renovations in the temple, and someone stumbles in this back room and sees this pot, and he opens it up, and there's a scroll inside of it, and it's the law. I mean, that's how bad things have gotten. They didn't even know they had a law. It was back, back in the Women's Association storage closet kind of thing. And so he followed the commandments of Moses. I mean, Moses is not referenced at all in 2 Kings until someone like Hezekiah does it. Okay, so here are these 4 chapters that brings up the end of the first Isaiah. So in 705, when the new Assyrian emperor, that's his name, takes over, Hezekiah stops paying tribute. Okay, so you're a regional superpower, you're a regional bully, you go and you take over another country, you pacify it, and then you don't want to keep all your troops there, so you leave a few troops there, but you say, look, you go ahead and run your own life, but you're a buffer state for me, so I've secured my borders some. Stay true to my foreign policy. Don't go make any sneaky alliances with anybody else, and give me some of your wealth. Pay me some stuff. I don't know, oil, something like that. Give me some stuff, and it'll be good. Well, there's a change in the emperor, and Hezekiah goes, hey, maybe we can stop paying tribute. So he stops paying tribute. But Assyria has good bookkeepers, and they say, hey, and so it attacks Judah and Jerusalem. This is in 705. This is the second of those 4 key events. And Assyria lays siege to Jerusalem in 705. And Assyria's general appears on the walls, in front of the walls of Jerusalem, and he says, surrender. In fact, he's so insolent, he mocks them. Hear the words of our great king, the king of Assyria. Thus says the king of Assyria, don't let Hezekiah deceive you, for he won't be able to deliver you. Don't let Hezekiah make you rely on the Lord by saying, the Lord will surely deliver us. The city will not be given over to the hand of the king of Assyria. Don't listen to him. For thus says the king of Assyria, make your peace with me. Come out to me. Then everyone of you will eat from your own vine and your own fig tree and drink water from your own cistern until I come and take you away to a land like your own land, a land of grain and wine, a land of bread and vineyards. Take you to Assyria. Don't let Hezekiah mislead you by saying, the Lord will save us. Have any of the gods of the nations saved their land out of the hand of the king of Assyria? Where are the gods of Hamath and Arpad? Where are the gods of Sepharvaim? Have they delivered Samaria out of my hand? Who among all the gods of the countries have saved their countries out of my hand, that the Lord should save Jerusalem out of my hand? It's pretty mocking stuff. He's the big bad guy. Don't worry about it. Well, Hezekiah is terrified by this. This is the next chapter. And he sends for a word from Isaiah. And Isaiah says, don't be afraid. Trust the Lord. God will defeat Assyria. It's not a very detailed battle plan, but it's the prophetic faith is that God is in control and God's going to protect Jerusalem. Don't buckle to the Assyrians. And so Hezekiah prays, save us. And then Isaiah brings a second word. God will defeat Assyria. He won't enter Jerusalem. but he'll return the way he came. And then an angel of the Lord strikes down 185,000 Assyrian soldiers in their camp. The king of Assyria retreats back to Nineveh. And while he's back there, while he's worshiping his pagan king, he's murdered by two of his sons. It's like the Game of Thrones. It's all good stuff here. And so God miraculously delivers Jerusalem. It's interesting. This is not corroborated by things, but the annals of Assyria do record that Sennacherib laid siege to Jerusalem and that he was unsuccessful and he retreated. So, different explanations, but the fact remains that Jerusalem was not conquered, that God did protect Jerusalem in this terrible crisis time because of the faithfulness of Hezekiah of not surrendering to this pagan king. Well, now we go off in the next chapter and we've kind of moved past the history of the personal life of Hezekiah. Subsequently, he gets sick, but he's healed by God. And then he gets sick again to the point of death. It's so bad that the prophet says it's time to put your things in order because you're going to die, which is not the greatest thing to hear. But Hezekiah prayed and God hears and he gives him an additional 15 years of life. And then we have a great little song in Isaiah 38 of Hezekiah praising God for his faithfulness to him. But then, it's the last chapter of Isaiah. It's that last part of 2 Kings 2. The king of, and again, Babylon is like, it's not an empire at this point. It's a minor little thing over in Iraq. Comes for a state visit. Hezekiah welcomes the king, and he shows him all the wealth of his palace and his temple. Isaiah finds out about this, and he prophesies, well, the day will come when these guys come back. It doesn't say these guys. When these guys come back and take everything from you. Your sons will be taken into exile. Hezekiah says, well, the word of the Lord that you have spoken is good, because he thought there would be peace and security in those days. It's kind of confusing at the end. Hezekiah, that last thing, basically saying, you're talking about something in the future. Things are going to be fine for the rest of my reign, so I guess I'm good with that. But basically, this is setting up the next big turn in the prophecy of Isaiah. We talk about how Isaiah 39 ends with this protection of Jerusalem in 705 BC, but then we open up chapter 40, and all of a sudden we're way into 540 BC. Babylon has destroyed Jerusalem and its walls and its temple. It's carted off its leadership into exiles for the last 50 years. And then Isaiah says, comfort, comfort my people. Your time of punishment is over. You've paid for your sins. There's a highway in the wilderness to bring you back to Jerusalem. But this is the little foreboding, foreshadowing of this. Hezekiah shows them all the wealth, and Babylonians think, wow, that's something we're going to go big later on. And that's how the end of first Isaiah wraps up. This God's faithfulness to Jerusalem because of this good king Hezekiah, but this foreshadowing of there's still trouble ahead of us that we'll read about in 2nd Isaiah.